and as tired as reception. I've really enjoyed seeing all your work on Tapestry and DBPrimary today. You're all doing fantastic and making me, Mrs. Dennis and Mrs. Dutton and Mrs. Farnell and Mrs. Slade and Miss Johnson really, really proud. For today's story time, I have chosen a Paddington book because I love Paddington. In this story, Paddington is in the garden. Now, I've seen lots of posts on Tapestry of you all playing and helping your families doing some gardening in your gardens. So I thought that we all might enjoy this one. And this book was written by Michael Bond. Okay, so let's get it started, shall we? Are you sitting comfortably? Okay. Oh, look at Paddington. One morning, Paddington went out into the garden and began making a list of all the nice things he could think of about being a bear and living with the Browns. He had a room of his own and a warm bed to sleep in. And he had marmalade for breakfast every morning. What would you have for breakfast every morning if you could? In darkest Peru, he had only been allowed it on Sundays. Oh, poor Paddington. The list was soon so long he had nearly run out of paper before he realised he had left out one of the nicest things of all. When this story's finished, maybe you could write a list of all the things that you're grateful for. Paddington had missed out the garden itself. Apart from the occasional noise from a nearby building site, it was so quiet and peaceful, it didn't seem like being in London at all. Look at the beautiful garden. But nice gardens don't just happen. They usually require a lot of hard work. And the one at number 32 Windsor Gardens was no exception. Mr. Brown had to mow the lawn twice a week, and Mrs. Brown was kept busy weeding the flowers beds. There was always something to do. Even Mrs. Bird lent a hand whenever she had a spare moment. It was Mrs. Bird who first suggested giving Jonathan, Judy and Paddington each a piece of the garden. It will keep certain bears out of mischief, she said meaningly, and it'll be fun for Jonathan and Judy as well. Mr. Brown agreed it was a very good idea, and he marked out 3 plots at the far end of the lawn. Paddington was most excited. I don't suppose there are many bears who have their own garden, he exclaimed. Early the next morning, all 3 set to work. Judy decided to make a flower bed, and Jonathan had his eye on some old paving stones. But Paddington didn't know what to do. In the past, he had often found that gardening was much harder than it looked, especially when you only had paws. In the end, armed with a jar of Mrs. Bird's homemade marmalade, he borrowed Mr. Brown's wheelbarrow and set off to look for ideas. What would you put in your garden? His first stop was a stall in the market, where he bought a book called How to Plan Your Garden by Lionel Trugg. It came complete with a large packet of assorted seeds, and if the picture on the front was anything to go by, it was no wonder Mr. Trugg looked happy, for he seemed to do most of his planning while lying in a hammock. By the end of the book, without lifting a finger, he was surrounded by blooms. Paddington decided it was very good value indeed, especially when the owner of the stall gave him 2 pence change. Oh, look. Mr. Trug's book was full of useful hints and tips. The first one suggested that before starting work, it was a good idea to close your eyes and try to picture what the garden would look like when it's finished. Shall we all have a go at that? Let's close our eyes and picture what our dream garden might look like. What's in your dream garden? Having walked into a lamppost by mistake, Paddington decided to read another page or two, and then he found a much better idea. Mr. Trug advised standing back and looking at the site from a safe distance, preferably somewhere high up. He knew just the spot. By the time Paddington reached the building site near the Brown's house, it was the middle of the morning and the men were all at their tea break. Placing his jar of marmalade on a wooden platform for safekeeping, he sat on a pile of bricks for a rest while he considered the matter. There was no one about, and there was a ladder nearby. I think Paddington's going to climb up the ladder. Mr. Trug was quite right. The Browns' garden did look different from high up. But before he had time to get his breath back, Paddington heard the sound of an engine started up. He peered through a gap in the boards. As he did so, his eyes nearly popped out. On the ground just below him, a man was emptying a load of concrete on the very spot where he had left his jar of marmalade. Paddington scrambled back down the ladder as fast as his legs would carry him, reaching the bottom just as the foreman came around the corner. "Is anything wrong?" asked the man. "You look upset." "My jar's been buried!" exclaimed Paddington hotly, pointing to the pile of concrete. It had some of Mrs. Bird's best golden chunks in it too. "I won't ask how your jar got there," said the foreman, turning to Paddington as his men set up to work clearing the concrete into small piles. "Or what you were doing up that ladder." "I'm glad of that," said Paddington, politely raising his hat. Suddenly, there was a whirring sound from somewhere overhead, and to Paddington's surprise, the platform landed at his feet. "My marmalade!" he exclaimed thankfully. "Your marmalade?" repeated the foreman, staring at the jar. "Did you say marmalade?" "That's right," said Paddington. "I put it there ready for my 11s. It must have been taken up by mistake. Now the top's come off. It's all gone everywhere." It was the foreman's turn to look as though he could hardly believe his eyes. "That's special quick-drying cement," he wailed. "It's probably rock hard already, ruined by a bear's marmalade. No one will give me a twopence for it now." "I will," said Paddington eagerly. "I've had an idea." Paddington was busy for the rest of the week. When the builders saw the rock garden he had made, they were most impressed, and the foreman even gave him some plants to finish it off until his seeds started to grow. "It's National Garden Day on Saturday," he said. "There are some very famous people judging it. I'll spread the word around. You never know your luck." Have a look at Paddington's lovely garden. He's done a great job. The foreman was as good as his word, and on Saturday half the neighbourhood turned up at number 32 Winter Gardens to see the judges arrive. Paddington nearly fell over backwards with surprise when he discovered that no less a person than Mr. Lionel Trugg himself was leading the procession. Here he is. "It's very good of you to get out of your hammock, Mr. Trugg," he exclaimed. Not at all," said Lionel Trugg. "My pleasure. I must say, I love your orange stones. Where did you find them?" "I didn't," said Paddington. "I think they found me, thanks to the builders." And they're all inspecting Paddington's garden. I wonder if he'll win. I hope so. "Congratulations," said Mr. Trugg as he handed Paddington a gold star. "It's good to see a young bear taking up gardening. I hope you'll be the first of many." "Who would have believed it?" said Mr. Brown as the last of the crowd departed. "You must write and tell Aunt Lucy all about it," said Mrs. Bird. "They'll be very excited in the home for retired bears when they hear the news." Paddington thought that was a good idea, but he had something to do first. He wanted to add one more item to his list of all the nice things there were about being a bear and living with the Browns: having my own rock garden. Then he signed his name and added his special paw print just to show it was genuine. The end. What a lovely story. And I really like that Paddington wrote a list of all the things that he was grateful for in the beginning. I wonder if you could write a list of everything that you're grateful for. I would love to see it on Tapestry. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye. Adios.